Get out now. This seat isn't for people like you." The words didn't just slice through the cabin, they detonated. The polite hush of first class fractured into a brittle silence. Every pair of eyes turned, every breath seemed to pause, all because a uniformed flight attendant decided that two young black women didn't belong where they were sitting. One of them, Zoe, lowered her book without hurry. Her fingers rested lightly on the hardcover as though she were closing a chapter, not reacting to an insult that carried generations of weight. Beside her, Thanks, in advance leaned back, phone in hand, gaze steady. Their calm was electric. It didn't diffuse the tension, it magnified it. The aisle between them and the rest of the cabin suddenly felt like a stage. Businessmen in suits stopped mid-sip, frozen with glasses half raised. A silver-haired woman clutched her pearls so tightly they trembled. Somewhere in row 3, a boy whispered to his mother, "Why is she yelling at them?" The mother's eyes darted nervously toward the attendant, but she had no answer. Cheryl, the flight attendant, didn't whisper. She wanted the entire section to hear. Her voice had the sharpness of someone who believed authority was the same as dignity. But authority borrowed can vanish. Dignity earned never does. She jabbed a finger toward the aisle, as if the simple gesture could erase the sisters from existence. Neither Zoe nor Thanks in advance moved. That refusal was louder than any argument. The silence that followed was not submission, it was defiance. Passengers shifted, unsure if this was policy or something uglier. Zoe's lips parted, but no outrage spilled out. Just 5 measured words. Run our names and see. Her tone was low, unhurried, almost too calm for the moment. Yet calm has a gravity of its own, and it pulled the room tighter. Thanks, in advance, didn't look at the attendant at all. She raised her phone, not to film, but to check the glowing screen. One number waited there, familiar, inevitable. She didn't press it. Not yet. The time would come. In the back row, a young man lifted his phone and began recording. The red light blinked, a quiet witness. "This doesn't feel right," he muttered. The older woman beside him nodded, whispering, "I've flown for 30 years. I've never seen staff tear into passengers like this." Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to Zoe, and thanks in advance. The attendant's shadow fell across their row as she leaned closer, her voice lowering but not softening. "If you don't leave now, security will remove you. Don't make this harder." "Harder for whom?" The cabin's silence answered. Everyone could feel it. The storm had already started. And in that storm, 2 sisters sat anchored, unshaken, waiting. Zoe Carter had always believed silence could be armor. That morning, it looked like a simple hardback novel propped open across her knees, pages lit softly by the overhead lamp. She wasn't really reading anymore, her eyes moved, but her mind was here, in the cabin, measuring every word, every stare. Beside her, her twin sister Thanks in advance scrolled through her phone, earbuds dangling like an unfinished sentence. Together, they looked like any other young travelers, modest sweats, clean sneakers, matching backpacks tucked neatly beneath the seats. Nothing about them announced wealth. No designer handbags, no glittering jewelry. Only the quiet confidence that comes from knowing the ground beneath your feet or the plane beneath your seat belongs to your family. They carried that secret lightly, deliberately hidden. This wasn't a random trip, it was a test. Their father, Marcus Carter, had asked them months ago to fly unaccompanied, without entourage, without privilege, just to see how the airline he owned treated passengers who didn't look the part. He called it an experiment. They called it proof. Zoe remembered his words before they boarded in Chicago. "People show their truth when they think you have no power. Don't rush to correct them. Watch." And so here they were, seatbelts fastened in the front row of first class, waiting for truth to show its face. It didn't take long. The cabin had smelled faintly of citrus and polished leather when they first sat down. An older man across the aisle offered a brief nod, polite, dismissive. A young couple in designer coats slid into seats a row behind them, giving the twins a once-over that said more than words ever could. Zoe felt it all, like static crawling across skin, but she didn't move. Neither did Thanks in advance. Thanks in advance tapped her phone screen again, lighting up the single-digit number programmed on speed dial. Her thumb hovered over it briefly before locking the screen. Not yet. Timing mattered. Their father had drilled that into them. Never show the full hand too early. Let them commit to their own mistake. To everyone else in the cabin, they were just two girls traveling beyond their means. That assumption hung in the recycled air, thick and unspoken. But assumptions can be dangerous, especially when made against daughters of the man who signed every paycheck in this airline. The book on Zoe's lap closed with a quiet thud. She looked across the aisle at her reflection in the glossy window. Two silhouettes, identical but distinct. A reminder that history often repeats, but sometimes it repeats with witnesses and with consequences. The flight attendant's shadow moved again, creeping closer down the aisle. Zoe straightened her spine. Thanks. In advance, exhaled. The test wasn't over. It was just beginning. Cheryl leaned in again, her polished name badge catching the dim cabin light. The sneer on her lips was sharper than any uniform pin. "These tickets don't look right," she said, voice pitched for everyone nearby to hear. "We've seen this scam before, people printing passes at home hoping no one checks." Her words spread like smoke. Passengers shifted, glances darted, assumptions flared. A businessman in a navy suit muttered, "First class isn't a lottery prize." His companion chuckled under his breath. Not subtle enough. "Thanks," in advance didn't flinch. She slipped her phone back into her pocket. Screen dark now, her eyes steady on Cheryl. Zoe, calm as stone, placed her closed book on the armrest. Neither reached for their bags. Neither moved to defend themselves, but Cheryl wasn't finished. She straightened, calling down the aisle. "Brian," she barked. A younger attendant strode over, his smile carrying the smugness of someone eager to play enforcer. He sized up the twins in a glance and shook his head. "Yeah, I've seen this before," Brian said, loud enough for row 4 to hear. "Flashy cards, fake IDs, thinking first class is a free ride." His laugh was quick, rehearsed. A ripple of murmurs followed. One passenger pulled out a phone openly, angling for a better shot. Another leaned closer to his wife, whispering, "They don't belong here. Just look at them." The sisters sat still. Their silence wasn't weakness, it was provocation. A challenge the crew didn't recognize. Zoe's gaze slid towards Cheryl, level and unblinking. "Run our names," she repeated, voice like glass under pressure. Brian scoffed, snatching the boarding pass stub from Zoe's seat pocket. Not even a good fake. He waved it like proof, though the stub had scanned green at the gate not 30 minutes earlier. The cabin grew heavier, the air thick with judgment. A woman in row 3 frowned, shaking her head as if watching a play she'd seen before. She whispered to the young man beside her, "This isn't policy. This is profiling." He lifted his phone, recording silently. The red light blinked like an accusation. Cheryl ignored them. She leaned closer, her perfume sharp, her tone sharper. "Here's what's going to happen. You'll stand up now and we'll reassign you to economy, or security will come on board. Your choice." For the first time, Zoe let her hands fold in her lap, a quiet signal of readiness. "Thanks," in advance tilted her head slightly, the ghost of a smile flickering, not from amusement but from certainty. They didn't move, and that refusal turned the cabin into a powder keg waiting for the match. The plane itself seemed to wait. Engines hummed steady outside, but inside the cabin, every sound was swallowed. No clink of glasses, no rustle of magazines, just the sharp breath of passengers watching two young women refuse to rise. Zoe rested her hands lightly on her lap. Her eyes did not follow the boarding pass Brian had just snatched away. Instead, she looked straight ahead, as if focusing on some distant horizon beyond the cabin walls. In that stillness, memories pressed forward. She was 15 again, standing in line at a boutique hotel in Charlotte, told to wait outside, because the lobby was for guests only. The humiliation of that moment had burned, but it had also shaped her. Now, 15 years later, the same tone, the same dismissal, echoed here in the skies, and just like then, she would not give them the satisfaction of panic. Beside her, "Thanks," in advance shifted only to place her phone face down on the armrest. Her voice, when it came, was quiet enough to force the attendant to lean in. "We're not moving." Simple words, no fire, no tremor. Yet in their restraint was the weight of something larger, certainty. Passengers exchanged looks. A silver-haired man in row 2 shook his head, whispering, "They should just comply." His wife frowned, replying, Comply with what? Sitting in the seats they paid for? The tension didn't just live in the confrontation now, it spread like a crack through glass, splitting the cabin itself. Cheryl's jaw tightened. Authority was supposed to command obedience instantly, but obedience hadn't come. She raised her voice, perhaps to fill the void Zoe and thanks in advance had left untouched. Security will handle this in 5 minutes. You can walk out or be dragged out. Still, the twins didn't move. Their calm had gravity. It pulled attention, shifted loyalties. The young man filming in the back whispered, "They're not even raising their voices. This doesn't feel like fraud, it feels like targeting." His phone's red light blinked steady, a witness neither Cheryl nor Brian could erase. Zoe finally turned her head, meeting Cheryl's stare directly. "Run, our names." Each word deliberate, paced like the ticking of a clock. The command wasn't shouted, but the silence that followed made it land heavier than any threat. Brian scoffed, trying to laugh it off, but his voice cracked slightly. He waved the torn boarding stub again. "You can fake a scan, you know. Don't act like this proves anything." But his confidence rang hollow now. The cabin had shifted. People weren't sure which side they were on, but they knew the sisters weren't afraid. And fearlessness unsettles more than anger. "Thanks." In advance exhaled slowly, leaning back. To the outside eye, it looked like surrender. But those who watched closely saw the steel in her posture. She wasn't folding. She was waiting. The cabin, once an arena for humiliation, had become a stage for endurance. And in endurance, the twins were winning. The silence couldn't hold forever. Someone had to break it, and it wasn't Zoe or thanks in advance. From row 4, a woman in a burgundy blazer lifted her phone high, camera aimed directly at Cheryl and Brian. "I'm filming this," she announced, voice trembling but loud enough to carry. "Everyone needs to see how you're treating them." The words landed like sparks on dry timber. Heads turned, phones slipped out of pockets, quiet screens lit up across the cabin. Cheryl stiffened. "Ma'am, filming crew procedures is prohibited." But her voice lacked the same steel as before. The more she demanded silence, the more the cabin grew noisy with dissent. A man across the aisle leaned toward his seatmate, whispering too loudly to stay private. "They're not doing anything wrong. This isn't security, it's prejudice." His seatmate nodded, tapping a message furiously into his phone. "On Horizon Flight 218, witnessing discrimination live." Near the back, a young Latina trainee in uniform badge reading Maya, flight attendant in training, froze with a tray of cups in her hands. She had seen Zoe's ticket scan green at the gate. She was sure of it. But Cheryl had already silenced her once that day. Her lips parted, then closed. Fear warred with conscience, her knuckles white around the plastic tray. A boy, no older than 10, tugged his mother's sleeve. "Mom, why don't they want them here?" His mother swallowed hard, whispering, "Some people just judge without reason." She pulled her son closer, protective, ashamed. Every row told a different story. Some passengers looked away, unwilling to engage. Others leaned in, murmuring solidarity. And a few smirked quietly, satisfied to see power flexed against those they assumed didn't belong. But the balance was shifting. The red recording lights dotted the cabin like tiny beacons. Each one meant accountability. Each one meant witnesses outside this room would soon join in. Brian noticed and tried to laugh it off. "Record all you want. They won't be here when we take off." Yet the bravado cracked around the edges. His eyes darted toward Cheryl, searching for reassurance that didn't come. Zoe didn't speak. She didn't need to. Every second she remained seated, composed. The crowd's doubt grew louder. Finally, from row 3, the woman in burgundy spoke again, her phone steady. "This is discrimination, pure and simple. They showed tickets. They're seated, and you're trying to erase them." The words weren't just commentary, they were declaration. The cabin had stopped being silent witnesses. It was becoming a jury. And in that jury, Cheryl and Brian were already on trial. The captain's door clicked open. The sound was small, but it cut through the cabin like a command. Every whisper stopped. Captain Harris stepped out, tall, jaw tight, uniform pressed so sharply it almost gleamed. He scanned the first-class rows once, then fixed his eyes on Zoe and thanks in advance. "What's the issue here?" Cheryl straightened instantly, as if salvation had arrived. "Unauthorized passengers, Captain. Fake tickets. They refused to move." Gasps fluttered. Several passengers shook their heads. The woman in burgundy whispered, "That's not true." We saw their tickets. But Harris ignored her. His gaze stayed locked on the twins. Ladies, he said, voice heavy with authority, you need to vacate these seats. Right now. First class is reserved for VIPs. We have platinum clients boarding. The phrase landed like a stone in water, rippling judgment through the rows. Platinum clients. As if Zoe and thanks in advance were placeholders, obstacles to real value. Zoe's voice was calm even. We are seated. Our tickets scanned. We belong here. Harris's eyes narrowed. Don't test me. Either you move voluntarily, or security will escort you off this plane. You'll be blacklisted. No, fly list. Is that clear? The threat sucked oxygen from the room. Passengers exchanged horrified looks. A man in row 5 muttered, Blacklist? For sitting in the seats they paid for? His wife gripped his arm, whispering, Quiet. Don't get involved. Brian folded his arms, smirking as though the captain's words had sealed the sisters' fate. Cheryl's lips curled in a quiet smile of triumph. But then, a quiet voice broke through. Maya, the trainee, still clutching her tray, finally spoke. Captain, their ticket scanned green. I saw it. Her voice trembled, but the truth in it was undeniable. Cheryl snapped. Stay out of this, trainee. Her eyes flashed, daring Maya to continue. Maya's hands shook, but she didn't back down completely. I just think we should double-check. The captain's jaw tightened, dismissive. This isn't your call. Protocol is clear. Around them, passengers stirred. The woman in burgundy raised her phone higher. We're filming this. Everyone can see who's telling the truth. The pressure thickened. What had begun as whispers was now open conflict. Every row a witness. Every second another chance for the truth to slip free. And still, Zoe and thanks in advance didn't move. Their silence, their composure, was louder than every threat the captain threw at them. The storm was gathering. The crew thought they had control. But the tide of the cabin was shifting, and when tides shift, they drown anyone standing on the wrong side. The cabin was already on edge, but Cheryl decided to strike the match. Without warning, she snatched the stub Brian had been waving and held it up like a prop. This is worthless, she declared. Then, with a violent rip, she tore it in two. The paper split with a sharp crack that echoed far louder than it should have. She let the pieces fall, fluttering onto Zoe's lap like scraps of dignity shredded before the entire cabin. Gasps erupted. A woman near the aisle clapped a hand to her mouth. She just destroyed their ticket. A man in row 5 muttered, That's illegal. That's destruction of property. Phones rose higher, lenses capturing every shred of the scene. Thanks. In advance, leaned forward slightly, her eyes cold. That was evidence. You'll regret that. Brian sneered, stepping closer. No one's regretting anything. You're done here. Get up. His hand twitched toward Zoe's arm, but he hesitated, aware of the dozen cameras now aimed at him. The captain stepped forward, jaw hard. Enough. Security will escort them off. Right now. He gestured toward the open door where 2 ground officers had appeared, summoned by Cheryl's earlier call. Their uniforms and radios made the threat real. A ripple of fear moved through the passengers. The little boy in row 3 whispered again, Mom, why are they being punished? His mother's voice cracked. Because some people think they don't belong. Zoe picked up the torn stub from her lap, the edges jagged. She turned it over once, then set it calmly on the tray table, as if even scraps deserved order. Her silence was louder than the captain's commands. Maya, the trainee, finally stepped into the aisle, voice shaking. Captain, please, this isn't right. I saw their scan. They belong here. Cheryl spun on her, fury breaking through her polished mask. One more word and you'll never finish training. Do you understand? But it was too late. The passengers had heard. The woman in burgundy spoke up, voice sharp. She confirmed it. Their tickets are valid, and you just ripped them up. The cabin buzzed with outrage, dozens of voices layering over each other. Phones recorded, whispers turned to declarations. This is discrimination. They're abusing their power. Unbelievable. The officers moved closer, their hands resting on belts, the unspoken threat of force heavy in the air. For the first time, Zoe lifted her chin, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. Touch us, and this airline will answer for it. The words froze the aisle, not shouted, not frantic calm, commanding, enough to make even the officers hesitate. But Cheryl, trembling now with anger more than confidence, hissed, You're nobodies, and nobodies don't fly first class. And with that, the line had been crossed. The cabin was no longer just tense, it was inflamed. The torn ticket stub still lay on Zoe's tray table, edges jagged like an open wound. But instead of looking at it, she looked past Cheryl, past the captain, past the officers standing in the doorway, her eyes fixed on nothing and everything, a horizon only she and her sister could see. Thanks, in advance, reached for her phone again. This time, she didn't just check the screen. She unlocked it with a calm swipe, pressed a single button, and lifted it to her ear. Her voice was steady, stripped of hesitation. "Dad, it's happening again." The cabin hushed. Passengers leaned forward, straining to hear. On the other end, the reply came fast, resonant, unmistakably commanding. "Stay calm. Thanks in advance." "I'm here. Zoe, are you listening?" Zoe inclined her head slightly toward the phone. "We're listening." The captain frowned, impatient. "Who exactly do you think you're calling? That won't save you from protocol." But the man's voice carried through the speaker, sharp enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Protocol is mine to define. This is Marcus Carter." The name hit like turbulence. Several passengers gasped. Someone whispered, "Carter Airlines? Wait, that's him?" Phones captured every second, the red recording lights multiplying. Cheryl's face went pale, but she forced a laugh. "Oh, please. Anyone can claim a name. That doesn't make it true." Marcus's voice was calm steel. "Patch me through to the cockpit now. This is the owner of this aircraft, and the employer of everyone standing in front of my daughters." The word daughters ignited the cabin. The woman in burgundy let out a low gasp. A man in row 6 muttered, "Their dad owns the airline?" The boy in row 3 tugged at his mother's sleeve again. "See? I told you they didn't do anything wrong." The captain's posture faltered for the first time. His jaw worked as though chewing on doubt. But Cheryl doubled down, spitting venom. "This is a scam. A rehearsed performance. These nobodies are not VIPs. Thanks," in advance lowered the phone just enough for her voice to carry. "Every second you keep saying that, the board is hearing it live." And she wasn't bluffing. On the line, Marcus gave his next order. "Rachel, log the incident. Send the footage and transcripts to James, Sarah, and David. Initiate immediate review." Somewhere behind the twins, a passenger muttered, "That's the board. He just said the board of directors." Another whispered, "This is real. This is really happening." Cheryl's bravado cracked. Brian shifted uneasily, suddenly aware that dozens of phones had captured every insult, every laugh. Even the officers hesitated, their hands loosening at their belts. Zoe finally leaned forward, folding her hands as if she were the one in command. Her voice was calm, but edged like tempered steel. "You tore up our tickets. You called us frauds. And you thought silence meant we had no power. You were wrong." The cabin wasn't quiet anymore. It was charged, pulsing with the awareness that the balance of control had shifted. And for the first time, it wasn't the crew in charge, it was the sisters. The name Marcus Carter hung in the air like smoke, seeping into every row. Some passengers whispered it as if confirming a rumor they never thought they'd witness. Others fumbled to type it into their phones, eyes widening when search results flashed back. Carter Airlines, founder, CEO, owner. Cheryl tried to laugh again, but the sound cracked, brittle. "Anyone can fake a phone call. This doesn't prove anything." As if on cue, Marcus's voice filled the cabin again, no longer just through "thanks" in advance's phone, but over the aircraft's intercom. The cockpit channel had opened. "This is Marcus Carter, owner of this airline. Captain Harris, you are speaking directly to me. Stand down." The effect was immediate. Gasps rippled through the rows. The businessman in the Navy suit who had mocked earlier now leaned forward, face drained. "It's real," he whispered. The woman in burgundy whispered into her camera, "He's on the line. The owner is on the line. These are his daughters." The captain froze mid-step, his authority unraveling in real time. His voice, once booming with certainty, now faltered. "Mr. Carter, I wasn't aware." Zoe finally spoke, her voice quiet but sharp enough to slice through the murmurs. "That's the problem. You never asked. You assumed." She gestured to the scraps of her torn ticket on the tray. "You called us frauds in seats we own, on planes we own." The cabin erupted not with laughter, not with outrage, but with stunned awe. Phones captured every word, every frame. For those watching live through shaky live streams, the twist was cinematic perfection. the so-called imposters revealing themselves as the true power behind the brand. Brian's arms, once folded smugly, now hung awkwardly at his sides. Cheryl's smile was gone, replaced with a pallor that spread fast across her face. Maya, the trainee, stood straighter, her trembling subsiding into something steadier, vindication. Marcus's voice returned, calm but thunderous in its finality. You have embarrassed my daughters, insulted my family, and humiliated my brand. This is no longer a misunderstanding. It is a breach of trust, and it will be corrected immediately. The boy in row 3 whispered, wide-eyed, They own the airline. His mother pulled him close, whispering back, Yes, and everyone's about to see what that means. Zoe lifted the torn ticket one last time, holding it between 2 fingers like evidence in a trial. She let it fall deliberately, her eyes never leaving Cheryl's. You thought paper was power, but paper burns, legacy doesn't. For the first time since the confrontation began, the balance of fear flipped. It was no longer Zoe and thanks in advance on trial. It was the crew, and the jury, the passengers, the cameras, the world beyond had already chosen a side. The ripple became a wave. Phones were everywhere now, held high, angled close, catching every twitch of the crew's faces. The live stream from row 6 spiked from 100 viewers to over 1,000 in minutes. Comments scrolled across the small screen. Unbelievable. Justice Live. They own the plane. Brian's smirk was gone. His hands fumbled with the torn ticket stub he'd snatched earlier, as if taping it back together could erase what he'd done. His lips parted, searching for excuses, but nothing came. Cheryl's authority shattered in plain sight, her cheeks flushed, eyes darting from passenger to passenger. Every phone pointed at her was a mirror she couldn't escape. She raised a trembling hand, as if to quiet the crowd, but the sound of clapping drowned her out. It started with one woman in burgundy, then spread, row by row, until the entire cabin echoed with applause. The captain stood rigid, caught between his duty and the undeniable voice of his employer echoing through the intercom. His jaw tightened, sweat glistening at his temple. "Mr. Carter," he stammered, I was misinformed. Procedures were misapplied." Marcus's voice cut back in, calm and final. Procedures were abused. By choice. Passengers gasped. Someone whispered, "He's ending them right here." Another muttered, "I've flown Carter Airlines for 10 years, never seen anything like this." Maya, the trainee, exhaled for the first time since the confrontation began. Her eyes shone with relief and vindication. She stepped closer to Zoe and thanks in advance, placing herself visibly at their side. It was a small gesture, but powerful like the first crack of dawn breaking a long night. Cheryl staggered back a step, her voice high, panicked now. This is a mistake. I didn't know. You didn't care," Zoe replied evenly, cutting her off. The words weren't loud, but they landed like a gavel. Brian tried to salvage something, anything. We were just following protocol." The woman in burgundy turned her phone toward him. "Your protocol is on tape. Every insult, every lie. The world will decide if that's protocol or prejudice." The officers who had come to escort the twins shifted uncomfortably. Their eyes flicked toward the door, toward each other, as if realizing they'd been drafted into a losing battle. One finally muttered under his breath, "We're not touching this." The applause swelled again, not mocking, not chaotic affirmation. The passengers had chosen their side. They weren't just witnesses anymore, they were protectors. For Cheryl, Brian, and even Captain Harris, the cabin was no longer an arena they controlled. It had traslash and Avmection squidred a capo. Ends formed into a courtroom. And in that courtroom, their verdict was already sealed. The applause still echoed when Marcus Carter's voice returned, firm and unyielding. "Captain Harris, hand your intercom to Zoe." Harris hesitated, color draining from his face. But with every camera pointed at him, with every passenger waiting, he couldn't refuse. His hand shook as he passed the handset across the aisle. Zoe accepted it calmly, as if she'd been in command all along. Her voice carried through the cabin, steady as a verdict. "This is Zoe Carter. Effective, immediately terminate Cheryl Daniels, senior flight attendant. Terminate Brian Keller, flight attendant. Suspend Captain Harris pending investigation. Lock their credentials. Remove their access." Gasps erupted, followed by a sharp intake of breath as the consequences arrived faster than anyone expected. Within seconds, Brian's ID badge, still clipped proudly to his chest, flashed red and buzzed. He yelped in shock, fumbling with it, but the system had already cut him off. Cheryl's badge blinked next, a dull red glow that seemed to brand her failure in front of the entire cabin. Passengers whispered, astonished. "It's live, it's instant. They're being fired right here." Maya's eyes widened, her tray nearly slipping from her hands. She glanced at Zoe with something between awe and gratitude. For the first time, she felt safe standing on the right side. Cheryl clutched at her useless badge, desperation cracking her voice. "You can't do this in front of everyone. This isn't—" "It is," Marcus interrupted, his voice coming through both the intercom and thanks in Advance's phone, layered like judgment itself. "You embarrassed my daughters. You embarrassed my passengers. You embarrassed this brand. Carter Airlines does not tolerate profiling, discrimination, or arrogance disguised as policy." The cabin burst into cheers. Some clapped, some shouted, "Yes," and a few even stood in their seats. The live stream chat flooded with fire emojis, applause, and disbelief turned to satisfaction. Brian slumped into the nearest empty seat, face pale. Cheryl shook her head, muttering excuses that no one wanted to hear. Harris lowered his eyes, his captain's stripes suddenly meaningless. Zoe handed the intercom back with quiet finality. "Thanks," In Advance leaned forward, her voice calm but razor-sharp. "You thought you had power, but power doesn't come from uniforms or titles, it comes from truth. And today, everyone saw it." Her words landed like the last nail in a coffin. The once divided cabin was now united not against the sisters, but against the very crew who had tried to erase them. Justice hadn't waited for landing. It had arrived 30,000 feet in the air. The cabin had changed. What began as a theater of humiliation had become a sanctuary of truth. Passengers weren't whispering anymore. They were clapping, some cheering, some wiping quiet tears. The woman in burgundy lowered her phone, her voice thick with emotion. "I've flown for 30 years, and I've never seen justice arrive this fast." The little boy in row 3 tugged his mother's arm again. "Mom," he whispered, "are they heroes?" His mother bent down, eyes glistening. "Yes," she said, "because they didn't give up, and they didn't yell. They just stood." Cheryl sat hunched in the jump seat, badge blinking red, face buried in her hands. Brian stared out the window, pale and wordless. Captain Harris's shoulders sagged under the weight of a silence no uniform could shield him from. They weren't villains to themselves, perhaps, but to this cabin, to this moment, they were. Zoe leaned back in her seat, eyes scanning the cabin. Every phone pointed not at her but at the truth she and her sister embodied. Calm, dignity, unshakable resolve. She turned her gaze toward the boy, offered him the faintest smile, and said gently, "Remember this. Silence isn't weakness. It's strength, waiting for the right time." "Thanks." In Advance placed her phone on the armrest, the call still open. Her father's voice came through, softer now. "You did well, both of you. You didn't have to raise your voices. You just had to stand in who you are." The words settled over the cabin like a benediction. For once, 30,000 feet above the earth, strangers felt like witnesses to something larger than travel. They had watched a narrative they knew too well, dismissal, prejudice, erasure, turn on its head. And in that reversal, they felt their own dignity restored. The applause rose again, not raucous this time, but steady, reverent, as if honoring more than victory, as if honoring survival, patience, and justice made visible. Zoe closed her eyes briefly, inhaling the charged air of the cabin, then spoke one final line. Her voice was low but carried through every row, carried into every phone recording, carried far beyond the fuselage of Flight 218. "You thought silence meant submission, but silence was power, and today it grounded an airline." The cabin fell still for a beat, the weight of her words pressing into every soul present. Then, one by one, the passengers rose to their feet, not for Cheryl, not for Harris, not for protocol, but for two sisters who had proven that dignity doesn't whisper. It echoes, and as the cameras kept rolling, as the live streams kept climbing, one truth remained. They hadn't just defended themselves. They had given everyone watching a glimpse of justice in its purest form, swift, undeniable, unforgettable.